The extended knowledge hypothesis is about the idea that the seed of knowledge extends past the individual, that it extends to other people, that when we know, the process of knowing goes beyond our own cognitive machinery to literal machinery, like the sort of machinery we carry around in our pocket. Now, this idea really challenges a lot of the fundamental assumptions that we've always had about knowledge and about the boundaries of the mind, of the self. And it's also an idea that plays a central role in my new book, The Internet of Us, Knowing More and Understanding Less in the Age of Big Data. So the information technology that is all around us is changing the way we know things, right? So how is it changing that? Well, I think the chief way we have of knowing things now could be called Google knowing. Google knowing is just a way of talking about knowledge by digital interface, the sort of knowledge you have when you search the internet with a search engine like Google, or when your smartwatch buzzes. So it's knowledge by digital interface. Now, a lot of people might think that how we know, that is how we Google know, is really not all that different than how we've known for a long time by reading or by writing or speaking to other people. But in fact, I think that's a mistake. There is actually a profound philosophical change that has been happening to our concept and the value we place on different kinds of knowledge. So let me explain. I think one way in which Google knowing is different than other types of knowledge that we've had before is that it is much more cognitively integrated. It's part of our lives in a sort of seamless way. I mean, think about it this way. We used to say that seeing is believing. Now we think that Googling is believing. I mean, if you get in a fight with your friends about some, fact or something comes up at a dinner party, what's the first thing everybody does? We all check our phones. We check Google. We check the internet. That's our default source of information now. And the fact that it's so default, that it's something that's so integrated into our daily processes of collecting information about the world and distributing it is an incredibly important feature of it. It makes it, in a way, as I said in a moment before, like seeing, like perception. But on the other hand, it's also the case that Google knowing now is extended or outsourced in a way that something like perception definitely isn't. What I mean by that is Google knowing is something that is dependent on other people. When I consult the internet, when I consult a search engine, I'm consulting a source that takes me to places where other people are distributing their viewpoints. So the information I receive is information that is dependent on other people. So that's what makes Google knowing so interesting to a philosopher, because it is both cognitively integrated and, in a sense, a seamless part of our lives. But on the other hand, it's also extended to other people outside of our body. It's, in a sense, becoming closer in and moving farther out at the same time. That, of course, is precisely what makes Google knowing so cool and so useful. It's what allows us to do the wonderful things that we can do with the digitally informed source of information that we have. But it also, I think, should sound a note of caution. Our increasing reliance on this form of knowledge should make us stop and get us to stop and think about a few things. So, one thing to keep in mind, or one note of caution we might think about, is that Google knowing is not the same thing as, let's say, what we might call understanding. Google knowing is a sort of a way of knowing that gets us a list of facts, a bunch of discrete packets of information. But when we understand something, we're engaged in a sort of act of creative synthesis. When we truly understand a subject, we're not just absorbing some discrete packets of information, some list of facts. We're also putting those facts together in new and unusual ways. That's what somebody who's an expert on something is able to do that a novice can't. They understand. And so I think understanding is something that we don't want to confuse with other ways of knowing. And yet our increasing reliance on Google knowing can get us to undervalue that creative active synthesis that I think really comes with true understanding. I'm not in saying that Google knowing or any other way of knowing other than understanding can't be a basis for further expertise or understanding. I'm not saying, for example, that reading a book is going to get you, one of these books here is going to necessarily get you to more understanding than reading it online. That's not my point. My point is that it's not the technology itself, but how we're using and valuing the technology. When we over-rely on one way of getting information, we sometimes undervalue other ways of getting information. That's the thing that I'm really concerned about. I mean, think of a comparison with the automobile. The automobile, when it was invented, was an amazing, revolutionary piece of technology. It got us to see that we could move to places we didn't realize that we could move to before. We expanded the transportation system, the food distribution network, all sorts of interesting things happened. But of course, there were some downsides too. And we are now experiencing those downsides across the world. Climate change, the erosion in certain places of city life. Those sorts of negative consequences came about not just because of the technology itself per se, but our overuse of the technology. Suddenly it became the only way we knew how to get where we wanted to go. We forgot about those other ways of getting where we wanted to go. That's what I'm saying about Google knowing. It's not our only way of knowing. And as we increasingly rely on it, we've got to remember that. Even though it's fascinating in its ability to both be integrated, like perception, increasingly so, into our daily life and perhaps even our bodies. And at the same time be extended and take us to actually across time and space and allow us to share information with other people. We need to remember that there are other ways to get where we want to go, epistemically speaking. So we're in a knowledge revolution. We are knowing more. But we don't want to just be more powerful knowers. We want to be more understanding knowers.